All right, this is my second podcast for your test on chapter 20 and 29. In this podcast, I'll be reviewing modern art. So we are in the late 19th century, and pretty sure we talked about the term modernism, but just to remind you, modern art is really a chronological term, and it's referring to art that's made in the second half of the 19th century on, which is kind of confusing because it overlaps with contemporary art. And hopefully, you know that contemporary art is art that's being made now, like the artists are alive today. So it's kind of confusing, but all you really need to know is that all of the artists we're talking about in this chapter are considered modernists, and that term comes about in the second half of the 19th century. We also talked about the term avant-garde. So, do you remember what that term means? If not, you need to look it up because most of the artists we're studying in this chapter are considered avant-garde artists. Okay, so skipping along here. Oh, we're still in Europe. There's a lot of events going on during this time. I'm not going to spend very much time talking about them, but one important one is the Second Industrial Revolution. So just remember that the Industrial Revolution itself is one of the big influential events going on, not only in the second half of the 19th century, but also the beginning of the 19th century. You see the Industrial Revolution come about. Things are being mass produced. We see the introduction of important building materials like wrought iron and then eventually steel, which allow for architects to start building buildings high, narrow and high buildings, and we see the first skyscrapers introduced. Okay, so just important to remember that. Okay, quickly, because there's a lot of different painting styles in this period, but here I have them for you in black and white with just a couple general characteristics that you can associate to each one. So realism, we start with realism, begins in 1848. Who is the leader of realism? We went over it in class. You need to know him. It's based on this theory of positivism. The realists painted the lower classes in their environments, doing everyday things, a lot of times toiling in the field or doing backbreaking work that nobody else wants to do. Lots of muddy color schemes, lots of monochromatic color schemes, and just really concerned with this idea of honesty and sincerity in their painting. And then I have a couple listed for you. Bridging realism to impressionism in this is this weird little movement called pre-Raphaelite. The big one there is Millet's, who painted Ophelia. This was primarily going on in England, and these artists are including fictional subject matter, sometimes historical subject matter, lots of literary and biblical themes. There is convincing illusionism, so it's easy not to get them mixed up with the Impressionists, and sometimes reflected spirituality and idealism. Then we move into the Impressionists. They're focused on plein air or outdoor scenes. They're focused on fleeting moments. They're obsessed with light and how light can change the color of an object or how it's reflected on an object. And they also use that characteristic loose brushwork. And then these are a couple important impressionists that you need to know. Moving on to post-impressionists, they are similar to the impressionists in that they use the impasto brushwork, but beyond that, they really have very few similarities. We talked about their use of color. You see deeper, darker colors. They use juxtaposition in their color schemes. They also preserved traditional elements such as perspective, and you'll see that in some of Van Gogh's paintings. And then as far as the post-impressionists, you really need to remember the Fab Four: Vincent van Gogh, Paul Gauguin, Georges Seurat, and Paul Cézanne. So just, keep those four in mind. Symbolism is a relatively brief artistic movement. It portrays mystical personal visions, dream-like subject matter, some sexuality, and you can associate Henri Rousseau and Edvard Munch with symbolism. Finally, the arts and crafts movement and Art Nouveau near the end of the chapter. So, um, arts and crafts movement embraced natural forms and used designs with repeated geometric floral patterns. And this is the idea of art should be utilitarian. So think William Morris and the decorative wallpaper and the furniture. That's arts and crafts movement. These artists believe that art should be used for something. Finally, Art Nouveau. Think of Gustav Klimt. He's a really popular artist who uses lots of geometric forms, geometric and organic forms in his paintings. And you'll see a lot of combination of painting, sculpture, and architecture. So remember that awesome building we looked at in class by Gaudi with the undulating facade. It's that big building in Spain that has the stone on top of the iron facade, and it's very organic looking. That's total Art Nouveau right there. So, was looking at your test, and there are a couple questions about, at least one or two about Daumier. So, think about what type of art is he making and what is the purpose of his artwork. So, he's not only an artist, but he's also a journalist as well. So, think about how his art is sometimes used as propaganda. And remember what's going on in this scene. What has he depicted in this lithograph? And note that there's also satirical elements to his work. So I threw in, well, here's another one, Nader raising photography to the height of art. So just to throw that in there, photography is recognized during this period as a respectable art form. We see artists are now entitled to legal protection, so people aren't able to copy their work. So that's important. But then this one is the one I was talking about, Gargantua. So another example of Daumier's interest in satirical, making fun of political figures, and he really sided with the urban working class. So all of his work was really in favor of them. So we talked about this painting, Olympia by Manet, who is a realist and an impressionist painter. And what style of art did we talk about that is influencing this? We compared it to some other female nudes as well. In the next slide, you can see. So how is she different? Okay. And Manet is influenced by Japanese woodblock prints, and so are a lot of the Impressionists. So remember what specifically about the Japanese woodblock prints, what characteristics are found in his painting and in some of the Impressionist paintings that we can associate with the woodblock prints. And I did embed a little video about Japanese woodblock prints, so I encourage you to watch it if you have time. So we didn't spend any time talking about this photograph in class, but it is notable, especially because it's another woman artist here, Gertrude Caisbier, and this is called Blessed Art Thou Among Women, done in 1899. So there's this method called the pictorial method where artists would use filtered light to create this very soft effect on the figures. And here we see Caisbier using it to bring out these symbolic themes. So we get a very religious or divine sense. It's a mother and child, but the mother looks very heavenly. Also very stark contrast of black and white there, but see how the figures are very fuzzy and soft? That's called the pictorial method. So remember her name. So we're now in Impressionist painting, and I'm sure you remember a lot of characteristics about Impressionist painting, and this is an important woman Impressionist painter, Bertha Morisot, and this is her painting Villa at the Seaside, done in 1874. So how is this typical of Impressionist painting, and maybe what discrepancies or what differences do you see? And also remember that most of Morso's paintings focus on domestic scenes, so family scenes. Um, and so, like other Impressionist artists, you see a lot of outdoor scenes that she's done. And then also take note of the symmetry here. Is the painting symmetrical or asymmetrical, and is that characteristic of the Impressionists or not? If you don't know, go back in the PowerPoint and look it up. So we didn't get to post-impressionism in class. Well, we talked about it a tiny bit, but just um, remember the descriptive words I gave you at the beginning of the podcast. Know the four big post-impressionist artists that you need to know. Here are their paintings. Van Gogh, Gauguin, Seurat, and Cezanne. How are they similar, and what differences do you see between their styles? These are people that you absolutely need to know their paintings. The College Board might pick a Gauguin, not this one, but may pick another Gauguin painting, and you will have to recognize that it is a Gauguin. So you have to be familiar with these people. Here's a good example of the juxtaposition of colors, the impasto. Those are some close-ups so you can see difference between a post-impressionist painting and a realist painting. Here's a Gauguin. This was at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Hopefully you were able to see it. It's very large. Know that George Seurat used this new technique of painting called pointillism, though he referred to it as divisionism. So remember that. And here's a close-up. It's just applying paint in small dabs. There's also a couple questions about Cezanne. So sorry, I got cut off there. But what you want to remember about Cezanne is that he's not exactly painting things very realistically. For example, here the perspective of the table versus the view of the fruit is not correct. We have more of an aerial view of the table and kind of a side view of some of the fruits. But what you want to remember about him is that he's also juxtaposing colors, much like the other post-impressionists do, but he's also interested in the underlying structure of the objects that he's painting. Symbolism deals with the exotic, the mysterious, the visionary, the dreamlike, and the fantastic. So great examples of symbolist paintings are Munch is a good one to remember. Gustave Moreau is perfect. And my favorite is Rousseau, Henri Rousseau, French painter who is untrained, by the way. You should remember that. So his paintings often look kind of simplified and childlike, but they almost always are depicting dreams or stories or things like that. So our big sculptor during this period is Rodin, so definitely know about Rodin. This is his Walking Man, which is in DC. So how are his sculptures similar to Impressionist painting? And what Renaissance sculptor influenced him? What materials did he use? Know about his process. Is he just creating these sculptures by himself, or did he have people helping him? Hopefully you remember. Definitely know this sculpture. What painting style influenced this sculpture? How did critics react to it? And what is the story behind the sculpture? We got a little bit into that in class. So I have less than a minute, so I have to hurry up. But this is the Casa Mila in Barcelona. This is the building I was talking about earlier that we can associate with the Art Nouveau movement. But you really need to know Louis Sullivan. Here, read about this, the curtain wall, the skeleton, you need to know all of that, the verticality, big emphasis on that. But know Louis Henry Sullivan, and just that he's really considered the first modern architect. Form follows function. It's just sad that we're skipping over the Eiffel Tower, but we have to. So just know Louis Sullivan's buildings and characteristics of modern architecture. And then here is my little review slide, so you can look over these things, play the Jeopardy, and good luck on your test. Email me if you have questions.